So, hi, I'm Muntis. I'm gonna be second speaker today. My background is more of a data scientist, but as of now everything is converging towards AI, so have I to some level. So my typical, let's say, role, so to give a bit of a background from where I'm coming from, is more of like a technical architect for, I would say, broader like data-enabled solutions. So if someone comes to, okay, so we have some data, we want to build like an analytical insights into our platform, I was probably the guy to go to for these kinds of features. So mostly development and technical architecture, so like a tech lead role. So yeah, mostly rapid prototyping, building new products or new features that are typically in kind of the newer side of technology. Probably my most in the last half a year, my most popular programming language is probably English, so I'm one of the, let's say, I don't know, agentic power users. So I have a QR code to my LinkedIn here, because I'm going to be sharing the presentation in probably like in a week's time, so you can take pictures, but you can also connect and just grab it in some time if you will. So about the day. So how many of you are like exclusively writing code kind of day-to-day task, like coders, programmers, if you like? Raise your hands. Okay, I would say around half. How many of you also do other things and you can overlap with the previous guys, like writing documentation, doing some architecture, some system design, things like that? Okay, so about that. So today I'm not going to be talking about vibe coding, or at least not as a focus. The previous talk covered some of that. I actually also gave a similar talk a few months ago, where I also explore like vibe coding and a bit broader like AI coding principles and methodologies that are developing on this technology, because vibe coding is typically described as a more disposable thing a little bit, so more for prototyping, and it's amazing for that. But you can also kind of stretch it into the more conventional development process, and today I want to talk about that. So I want to talk about general kind of AI and Gen AI role in software development cycle as a whole, so a bit broader. So I'm gonna cover a bit of like tools landscape, what's typical there, what is the software development lifecycle as a process. I hope most of you know that. If not, you're not from the industry, then maybe this is not the meetup for you. So a little bit about AI-assisted development, like in the broader terms, like what's probably the outcome of that. AI in like business analysis, so the stages around the kind of implementation steps, and the changes in the software development cycle as a whole, and a bit of our experience and such. So I created a picture like this, where I try to convey two thoughts. So there are a bunch of tools, like this is just the tip of the iceberg, let's say, of the more popular ones. AI-related tools. All of them behind the scenes work on one of the larger LLM providers down here. So what I want to say with this picture? Well, these agentic tools are built on top of the LLMs, right? And what we see is happening in the industry. We see there are the generalist tools. That is something good for all, or maybe not great for any one thing in particular. So your typical broad spectrum chatbots are probably there. And then there are like really specialist things, right? These are still all based on the LLMs in some way or form, but these are like specifically tools for the coder and like very advanced coder who only works in the terminal and things like that, right? And there's some things in more modern in the middle one. I don't want to start like a religious war about which IDE or anything like that is a bit better, but I think it's something like that. I'm not gonna die on a hill where these things exactly are on this matrix, but I kind of put them where I think they should be. So that's on the kind of specialist side and generalist. What we see in the specialist side is that all of this are coding tools. There are probably more processes in the world that's not just coding, where AI is amazing, right? So there's probably plenty of space for things there. But what does it mean? So on the other spectrum, it's kind of more task-oriented, so like an AI that can do like one particular task. and do it well, like, I don't know, generate a piece of code, that's great, but you still need to process it through everything, release a feature, all of the whole process, right? So the writing code, whether by keyboard or by agent, is only one part of everything, right? And then on the other end, it's more of a workflow things. So probably things like Lovable, Replit, just presented previously as one of the vibe coding platforms. They do a bit more. They also do deployment, some sort of versioning, some integrations are sometimes built in, right? So they do a bit more on the whole workflow thing. Again, these are mostly coding tools. Things like Claude and is trying to add more and more to kind of more workflow things like integration with Microsoft Office. They did some weeks ago, and like Copilot is everywhere in Microsoft ecosystem right now as well. So this is kind of picture. I believe most of the super valuable unicorn startups will be here. So things that try to automate workflows and things that are outside of the implementation phase, let's call it like that. But today I actually want to talk about, okay, so these things that are more in the middle, and I put Copilot, GitHub Copilot here because I'm going to show a couple demos with that today. I think they are underused in non-strictly implementing development parts. So what I mean by that is that software development process, SDLC, is very, and its life cycle is something like this. You probably see something like this in your university or something like that. Whether that's a waterfall or agile or spiral or RAP or whichever model you're using, you probably more or less have these same steps. Sometimes you have them in iterations, sometimes you have them once like in waterfall or like a V model or something like that. But you always do some sort of a planning or ideation. You do some analysis, okay, what of this makes sense to do, is it possible, is it feasible? Then you design the system, do some architecture around it, then you do the actual implementation, so this is where the coding happens. Then you still need to do some test and integration, and then afterwards, unfortunately, you have to do the maintenance, right, if someone ends up using your product. And then, oftentimes, if this is like an agile or something, you probably try to iterate as many times as possible, because smaller iterations, better feedback, all of that stuff. What is interesting is that not all of the roles, and these roughly translate to like a role person in software development cycle, are like equally needed in all of the steps, right? When you do initial analysis and like system design and architecture, you probably do that in the first exploration phases more. And then afterwards, well, yes, for new features you do that, but probably a lot of the foundations are already built. So it's not evenly distributed. So why 9 out of the 10 presentations around AI tooling talk about the implementation, if that is, well, maybe a third of the software development cycle? So I wanted to talk about that gap today a bit. I have some experience with it. All of it is the view still from the developer, right? So it's going to be maybe technical. If you have very small questions, like pretty much yes, no, or what does that word mean, ask right away, like raise a hand. If you have longer questions, keep that at the end. So yeah, the process is fairly established. The AI coding tools are not changing or skipping any of these steps, right? We still do all of them. Maybe some of them become very, very small and some other ones become very big, but fundamentally the steps are still largely the same. So let's talk about business requirements part, which are more of the first stages of these things. So business requirements and afterwards the design and analysis stage are very textual type of tasks. So you do meetings with stakeholders, as in the previous discussions, right? You try to capture the requirements. The requirements are super clear every time. Everything's captured, right? It's very understandable what happens. What you're actually doing is you are doing translation between 4 or 5 different kind of languages or understandings or levels of details during the development. So you have some idea that you try to put on the paper in the requirements. Sometimes you miss steps. Then you try to do that into the architecture. Well, maybe if something was missed in the idea, you can make a wrong decision here. Then you continue with actually planning and implementing. Some unknown constraints appear and you end up changing the architecture, but it was set initially, right? then you do some maintenance and handover, and then it turns out that the thing that you were trying to do the idea for has already changed, and now need to change the API and all of that. So it's amazing, right? The requirements are always very clear. So the important bit is to understand that the things that I'm going to talk about, it's not like it solves all of the issues or anything like that. It's more about, okay, so the process exists. Let's see how people can benefit and do it better or faster, or I don't think that it's very very smart to try to say that you can do anything like in a faster way. You can probably get to better quality results or have shorter iterations, right? But the things that need to be done still need to be done. Okay, about some of the first steps in the development cycle. So analysis and planning. So this is probably like for a BA role. LLMs, AI in general, is very great at kind of discovery and planning phase if you have a lot of contextual information, right? What this means is that, as talk in the talk before me, having some sort of transcripts or workshop notes or these whiteboard activities where you gather a lot of the notes, or sometimes clients can provide like a large documentation about even their adjacent things into their business. So for example, someone comes to you, they need to build an app. Well, you probably need to do not what the app needs to do, but you need to also know what their business does, what's their go-to-market strategy, which are their competitors, right? Because these things will impact how you think about that, but if you're not capturing that into the requirements, or let's say adjacent or tangent context, you might lose it. The good thing with the AIs is they don't get tired. You just pay for more tokens, so you can just add more and more documents to these things to sometimes get a more robust full feature. This is where the actual prototyping and doing the initial things is super useful, because if you ask for an AI to build an app for like managing your calendar or time, right, that's one thing. But if you say that it's for kids, or for people in the school, or maybe it's for elderly people, right? It's going to change a lot of underlying things, like, I don't know, buttons need to be big, or they need to be colorful, or something like that, or you might need to be able to share your schedule because you're in school and parents need to pick you up, right? These decisions sometimes get lost, and they're like known tribal knowledge. If you can somehow fit that into the LLM's context, that's great, right? It might be something that's easier to miss if you're just manually going through everything. So the value is really high to to have like a starting point for gathering requirements and extracting them, right? So you might reduce like the blank page effect for base, so you need to start somewhere. You probably start with the critical things. You might miss something that's, again, tribal knowledge. Another example, if this is not a fresh project, but it's like a legacy project or called brownfield project, right, where you are just put into the 20-year-old code base with difficult to understand logic, lost requirements that have been changed 10 times that I never really documented that well. With the AI tools, you might not be a coder, but you can ask for the coder tool to dig into the code base, follow through the logic, and translate it to a business understandable logic and constraints. And this is amazing to go into the pre-existing projects and kind of kickstart you a bit to start faster. And also you don't need to always nag the original developer or just a developer to explain how a SQL procedure works, because, well, you can ask AI how it works, and it works very well 9 out of 10 times. And in general, like gap analysis as well. So if this is a more of a brownfield project, something like, okay, I need to implement a feature, can you quickly do it? Like, that's the standard feature, takes 1 day. And then it turns out that there is some weird thing, like a quirk with the system, or some constraints built in, or some other things that you didn't foresee, and it turns out that the change request is like a, not a small change request, but like a 2-week long feature that you need to build. Well, doing some preliminary code base examination and saying, okay, I need to build this, what would be the high-level plan, do some estimates, very valuable for both BAs, and oftentimes this is like a more technical task, right? So this would be done by like a tech lead or something like that. So these are the kind of some of the steps in one of the first steps of the project that can be useful. So I have 3 demos, like a small one slide, 1 page style demos in this presentation. All of them are based around like an open source software that I just picked almost randomly. Why? To kind of show, okay, so this is like if you were put into the new project where I was, like I have no background knowledge of that thing whatsoever. So the first one is going to be, okay, I need to understand like logic around specific feature around promotions in this platform. I'm going to show what the platform is a little bit. So I'm going to use this one. You can, oh, it doesn't share. Second. So I'm going to take this one, like the Medusa JS. So it's like a e-commerce platform where you can have your projects and then your products and register them, and I think it has like integrations with like different marketplaces and markets and whatnot. And it's like an open source thing. But let's say you needed, like you could use it, but you needed to add a feature right to it, or you want to understand if you can add it afterwards, since well it's open source. Well, and what I'm showing here is I'm showing VS Code. Let's say you're a business analyst. I hope I can zoom in this view as well. So I'm going to show what's here. So I'm saying like I'm a business analyst, or I want to use this product. Can you please explain how the specific feature of it works? So it's like compute actions. Took into like how does the system decide if the promotion is valid? How does it accept it? All of that stuff. Right, so maybe it doesn't have a documentation around this particular feature, or you've noticed that there are changes and the documentation is outdated by now. So you can query to do something like this. You don't need to understand like the full code base, and what will be the output of this is a document. It's very difficult to work when I'm zoomed in. So something like this. The chat, right? So this is like the output of the thing that I asked it, and since I created a prompt that's around, okay, from the business analysis point of view, what does this feature means? This here now has the description. Okay, so there are some set constraints that the promotion needs to go through. How do the items qualify it? How does the other rules get applied to, like there's a quantity check for the cart or something like that, right? And then it also has like a sequence diagram. Okay, how does this go through the API? How does the validation get set? So you can understand a bit more on the process, right? And you might not be able to read code, but you can probably read this as a business analyst, right? And it's more or less correct. Like the LLMs are always interesting. This is a bit more complex. I would be a bit worried that it might not be fully correct. So maybe a bit too complicated example, but the good thing is that this might give you at least the first insight on where to kind of prod like a developer and say, okay, I did this analysis, does this look correct? What would be the estimates to change this feature, for example, right? So you're like a step ahead. You don't have the zero iteration to start a conversation. You already are starting at the iteration 1 or 2, essentially, and discussing these things. Yeah, and again, changing the prompt or whatever, you can get very the results that might be better for you. Okay, that was the first kind of step. So the next step, kind of more analysis and design. So this is probably like a business analyst or system analyst that might work in this case. Sometimes like a solution lead or solution architect. Sorry. So about drafting like initial architecture documentation, what I find it very useful, and I do this very often, is if like 5 years ago you needed to research some internet, maybe read some books, maybe get an education, and then you have some idea around different architecture patterns and things that could work for a specific solution, right? And you still need to do that, but what helps now is that it's quite easy to kind of put head-to-head different ideas of the implementation or ask AI, okay, so these are the things that I need to do, or this is the recommendation, the requirement documentation. And you can ask, okay, so how would this look like if I built it as a monolith? Or what does this look like if I built it as a microservices? What are the gaps or pros and cons of using this database or that database? Do I need one database? Do I need vector database for semantic search because I'm going to have an AI planned in the future, right? So these sorts of decisions, you can kind of also get ahead a little bit. You can have a more robust first iteration of said document. I still think that these important decisions, again, never should be done alone. The thing is, you're not starting on your own and asking colleague, you're starting yourself with an AI, hopefully doing multiple rounds of changes to it and saying, okay, this is trash it out. You need to torture the AI a little bit, right? If you made an architecture decision and down the road you realize, well, this is not ideal, this is like 80% ideal. I don't want to rework all of it, right? The humans are very like that. But for the AI, like you just ask it to regenerate it and go for a coffee, right? With your change implemented. So you need to pay extra attention to that. So do more iterations before actually getting to the implementation. This, at least in theory, should lead to a bit better decisions made early on, although oftentimes the problems appear later on could not have been foreseen. So use the AI as like extra eyes on the work that you're doing in these stages. If this is something in more like brownfield environment, visualizing logic and like the interactions between modules or services is very important. Again, similar to the previous example, you can do that with the coding tools. Even if you're more familiar with the code as a like solutions architect, but maybe you don't write it for the last 10 years or something like that. So it's still very useful. And yeah, as I mentioned already, trade-off analysis. Very interesting to kind of get a head-to-head between the different ideas and do a gap analysis between, okay, is this thing great to do or something else? The benefit there is a little bit lower than just doing it in the initial project, because you still need to know the concepts and kind of questions to ask, so you require some prior experience for that.
May I add a comment a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually one sample how agentic part is actually dangerous for your health. As you mentioned that you write prompts, you engage, and then you wait for 5 minutes. And all of our developers that actually work with this, they are smoking more. Because they run it, and then they go out for a smoke. And I see people...
Yeah, you do push-ups instead, then it's healthy.
So that's perhaps an alternative, but unfortunately the smoke is prohibited at the moment.
Yes. Well, that's nice. I just switched to the other work tree and continue work on the other features, so... I don't know, it depends.
Alternative, yeah. You're not paid for doing like multitasking.
Yeah, I mean, it is very, and I will have a slide a bit later on. These things are mentally very taxing at the end of the day, right? Because you can maybe write a few thousands lines of code, right? You can probably review like 10,000 lines of code, but you are like spent at the end of the day. It's very mentally taxing and difficult, so actually having a good balance between types of tasks that you're doing is very important. So a bit more on this kind of data archaeologist, like trying to figure out like what's already there. Again, if this is a brownfield sort of thing, or if you're like a data engineer, so you might be able to write like SQL or look at the database or build some dashboard, but maybe you don't like write TypeScript or something like that to understand how like the front end part is implemented. So what actually ends up being into the data or something like that, or what are the relations because someone forgot to set up some constraints into the database. Well, you can still do that. Again, the logic is very simple. I already did this for you, so you don't have to wait 44 seconds or however long this takes. So you create, again, a prompt. Yeah, I think this is the wrong one.
You can see if you show
Oh, that's good because you opened the wrong one. The English thing that it does this. Okay, so if you're like a data engineer, and you want to, let's say, figure out how a specific thing will lead up to the data, but you need to essentially figure out what the front end is doing because someone wipe coded it. You can also do something similar, right? You can ask your AI to investigate the database, figure out the relations between tables and things like that, and generate diagrams out from it. Like, and the output will be something like this. Again, very weird to work on this screen. Right, so you can actually create, similarly to the previous one, you can create diagrams that describe the process that's happening, that will describe like the logic, that's like the rules that get applied. These might translate to how you do like some queries on your analytics dashboards or some things like that. And when things get triggered specifically, when specific thing is recalculated, right? If the logic is in the backend or in the right, not in the database procedures or something like that. So this would be very helpful to actually get to the results. Also, similarly, get some charts to get an output. Again, you don't need to be able to read the full code. It of course helps, but you can get very. These are quite trustworthy, right? As everything with AI, you have to do a sanity checks, but it's quite good. So yeah, and if you have like a specific question about, I think I had it in the prompt to figure out how in specific case things would be calculated, you can also like ask it very explicitly to just, I don't know, maybe debug why a specific value in the column is done in a specific way. Again, micro demo done.
How much sessions do you keep live on your local machine when you're working?
I try to keep like one feature per session, but then I sometimes like fork it to keep the context and do some magic with the memories and stuff. But no, try to keep the sanity check and only have one or two. Okay, the next step in the software development cycle is the implementation. I'm not going to talk about it in great detail because some months ago I gave a presentation. You can find the link in the DevClub around this. How I think about it, there are actually developed like methods on how to use this tooling better and better. The landscape changes super fast, so like half of this is maybe not true anymore. I think most of it is, but still. So not about that today. And okay, so moving on, kind of skipping implementation, and now I've combined the last two stages a little bit, but there are two slides about this. So implementation, like a little bit around it, that's not just coding, the testing phase and the maintenance afterwards. And here AI can really work as a, similar to the previous example, as a translator between the business and kind of data implementation. So if you have your original requirements, let's say, and now you're at the like testing phase and need to figure out if this thing was properly implemented, you can help to look some things up to figure out why they are not or working correctly. I have business analysts who can write like some SQL code, like they can do some wheres and constraints, right? Complex joins between the functions or something like that doesn't really happen, but if they need to be able to do that, super useful, right? They can probably read more complex SQL, maybe they cannot write it. So there the kind of value is pretty high, but it can also be negative if you can make mistakes. Again, this is a new risk. I'll have a collection of the new risks in the AI landscape at the end of the presentation. And also like explaining the queries, I think I mentioned that in the previous slides as well. Very, very useful for complex logic. A lot of the legacy code bases coded their business logic into the functions of the database, right? We don't do that usually anymore. It's more typical into the backend, but we have to work with these systems. Or sometimes it makes sense if you really want to optimize for something like analytics. But then it's very useful. And synthetic data generation, I think the value is a bit lower there because there existed tools before AI for these sorts of tasks as well. And then kind of continuation on that, more on the testing and maintenance side, sorry, the documentation side. Also creating the documentation for existing features, like generating readmes or API documentation for the places where it's not pre-existent. Again, by following good practices, you should have these things. again, someone needs to update them, so we probably all have seen documentation that's outdated even in very modern tools, right? So here the value is very high because, well, you're generating the documentation on demand. It can have mistakes, well, but then the outdated documentation also have the mistakes because it's outdated, right? So I think that the value is generally pretty high. And people don't typically like this task to document something, so the AI helps a lot. Also just standardizing things. If these are developers, I have like a special skill which is like create a PR documentation where it's gathering the changes in my feature branch and creating like a one page of the things that are done and why they're done, and all of them look the same, so it looks like I'm very consistent, although I'm very chaotic. So that's great. Test case generation, I haven't covered testing as like a separate part here, but that's also one of the places where I think AI really shines, because the code helps as a requirement, like works as a requirement or specification for how to do some of the tests. So actually generating tests is pretty useful for like unit tests level. And then if you have like a full nice workflow where you have acceptance criteria as well as part of your tickets, then actually using those as an input for the test generation is great as well. And people typically hate writing tests, right? So actually generating them and then just kind of following through if they cover the things that were already documented before is pretty nice for a lot of developers. And I've been doing a lot like more of the later things, so this is kind of more implementation part, but I put it here as well. So I have like two sets of code review skills in for my agent, where one is more okay, so this is like our code base, we structure things in specific way. I don't know, syntax and linters you shouldn't do in AI, you should do them in linter rules, but still have something useful there. Right, so that's kind of one thing, more about the actual like characters. And the second one is, well, does this comply with the rest of the code base? Am I reusing the configurations? Am I using the right helpers and utilities? Am I not duplicating code? So like a checklist like that, which is more like a logic checklist, right? So run things by AI before pushing your feature, because then the people who will do the review will not have to nag you about like nitpick, okay, you're using the wrong function for a specific thing. So I should do that. Again, you're essentially saving cycles, right? Someone didn't need to remind you that your file name is wrong because AI caught that for you, so your colleague can actually maybe say that your logic is wrong. Again, kind of last micro demo for here as well. So this is a little bit more about the, let's say, a project manager at the kind of later phases into the project, where there is some more complex workflow that needs to be analyzed because there's like a feature request. Again, the demo will be pretty much the same as before. So I think I had them misnumbered. So this is actually this one. Yeah. So you're like a project manager. You need to understand.
We don't see that.
Okay. I clicked the duplicate, but the Microsoft PowerPoint is interesting. It like still extends the screen then. Okay, so if you're like a project manager, you need to understand like a workflow of like a card update feature. You have specific questions about like what is happening in like some fail scenarios, because there's like a bug that's being reported, and you might need to do like a change request. Again, follow the same steps. You might fine-tune your prompt along the way or something like that. And the output is actually I actually showed the wrong one before. Yeah, so this is, I actually showed the wrong one and no one told me. Again, you can generate like a logic description of a specific feature and then figure out, okay, there needs to be a new constraint. Since this is linked to the file changes, you might have a better idea around what would be like the impact for implementing specific change feature. Again, you don't need to read the full code. You can refer to the English version of code in some way, right? Because the AI just looked at the current version of the code. Cheers. Okay, so a bit of a summary and like closing thoughts from my side. So I think that the implementation phase is very well covered. I wouldn't say that the kind of coder or creating code is like a solved problem. I think the tooling is pretty solved in a way that it's already very useful. So every developer who's using these AI tools that I know of don't want to go back before we got these tools. They might not always work, but they are pretty great at some things. So what I'll always say to the people that are like fear-mongering, okay, you can fire our developers, I agree with the sentiment that the juniors are probably in a bit more weird position at the moment, right? That everyone needs seniors now, because seniors know how to work with these tools and get actual benefits out. Who will be actually using these tools? Well, it's going to be the developers. It's just going to be more like an architect or reviewer or pair programmer role rather than writing things by hand. But then in all of the other phases, I think these are still somewhat open. People are using all kinds of tooling kind of independently. You have your, I don't know, your work cloud license or something like that, or some sort of another solution. And you can do in like planning analysis, like things that I showed today, transcribing the documents, having a better understanding of context, ask for the AI to create shortlists for you to review rather than going through all the documents, right? So you can put more of the context or more of the iterations into the work. You still might be limited by you have like twice a week meeting with your client. But now you are way more prepared for the meeting, or you have more exact questions, or you've covered way more ground of the requirements, and you can have questions, right? So it's more quality thing than quantity or velocity, maybe. And then for the data and maintenance phases, some people have very great luck of, if you're the system designed in a specific way, actually debugging can be really nice with the AI, as it can just give it to read logs, and it sometimes find things that might have asked you 10 times more time. Sometimes it's the opposite, AI gets very lost in the long context. So again, it's a tool to figure out when it can use. And then for the data parts, if you want to work with the output of a specific program, explaining how some things get made and got registered or entered into the databases and the system, it's very high value. I think this is one of the areas where we'll see more and more of these tools that are working right. I want to see the people working on dashboards to run AI on the queries or on the backend logic to maybe explain if there are bugs in the data to figure out if that's like a dashboard issue or logic issue or implemented because the requirements are not the same as documented in the last version. And some closing thoughts, not in particular order maybe. So all of these documents that you're creating, well, someone needs to update them and maintain them, right? Well, people actually always needed to do that, but it didn't really happen. So since we can now use code as some sort of a specification or a ground, like the source of the truth, you can actually generate documents on demand, right? So there's a chance that they are better updated than outdated or non-existing documents, right? You can still have errors there, but very likely it's actually better than the outdated documentation number of errors, right? There is a thing that not so many people talk about a compounding error, right? So if you have a person creating a specification or like a business describing an idea with AI, then you have your analyst splitting the idea down into the tasks or modules or features with AI. Then you have the developer doing the implementation with AI, and then someone creates the documentation in the end with the AI. Even if every step is like 98% correct, 98 times 98 times 0.98 times 0.98, well, you end up being like 80% correct software, right? Well, it's not as grim as that, but compounding error, like these stacking up, might happen. The same thing could have happened before with like Chinese whispers, which is like a close telephone, right? The problem where people, business talks to analyst, analyst talks to like tech lead talks to the junior implements, right? So you can have this sort of still loss in the translation. So maybe we can actually skip some of the translation steps with the AI, right? If you have your like this full flow, maybe from the business requirements you can get to the level, like to the tickets level or to the architecture level by skipping some steps, or still just keep them into the context, right? So it might solve some of those things. It's clear that you can actually review more code than you can write, but it's very mentally exhausting, like this comment already I meant, right? What I've seen happen in practice, there are people who will generate code because it's fast, and then we will create a pull request, and then someone needs to review it. They are mentally offloading their task of actually doing the problem to like a senior. Well, senior could have probably also run the prompt and just push it, right? But the thing is, someone needs to validate if it's doing the thing it's supposed to do, like if it's correct. So, and the senior probably could have prompted better. So you need to, especially if you're junior, you need to really put in the work and actually review it and understand it. And I think it makes more sense to learn patterns and architecture than it maybe makes sense to learn like syntax at the moment with how the tools are going. So what is the actual bottleneck? Well, we got, some people said like 2 times faster codes or 10 times faster writing code, right? The AI hype is crazy. Well, we don't see 10 times more apps or 10 times more products, right? Or maybe we do, but we still only see the tip of the iceberg. So, because the bottleneck is actually the good ideas, right? We can create 100 times more code, but you can only do so many good ideas that are still market valuable. So again, prototyping, very important, figuring out on how to filter out bad ideas, more important than ever, because implementation has become cheap and easy. Lots of tasks and skills are kind of bound what I would say like interaction count, so this is a bit harder to explain. But what I talk about the business analyst, for example, working, they will have like, I don't know, like 5 meetings with the client up until the end of the month, alright? So they can do now more prepare more for each of these meetings, but they still have 5. So the iteration count is still the same. The difference is the volume of the work that can be done into each iteration. We see this into the development, where the features get bigger. Like developer still works 8 hours a day or often more, but the features are just bigger. Like previously it was like change the color of the button, now it's like implement this page, right? That's the standard for a user story or for a feature or for a ticket, right? But this is happening a lot. The loss of the ownership and accountability, like the story explained about pushing a PR and then someone else needs to review it. Well, no, you still own it, right? You still need to take care of it. The similar thing is true about like the business analysis. It could be very easy to just put all of your business requirements, documentation, or the other tangent data you get from your clients into the AI and say, okay, generate this nice document by these guidelines. But if you don't kind of go through and validate it, the same thing happens. Like you still own it. You're still responsible for the output. It doesn't matter if you wrote it by hand or by AI. You are putting your signature on it, right? And then sometimes what I noticed here as well, if you're looking for constraints, so let's say you know specific constraints on the VA side of things, and you see something that's kind of similar and kind of matches it, okay, you're fine with it. But if you wrote it, you maybe were more explicit. So unlike the edge cases, when interpretation can play a role, actually I think these things are difficult to sometimes see, because there are certain tasks that are harder to do at the reviewing time, right, actually reading the outputs, than they are at like the creating time. So if you would write it down, you would have like very specific, okay, 4 bullets, 4 constraints, that's explicit. Instead you read like very long documentation, well, it was kind of mentioned here and kind of mentioned there, right? So these things can actually get lost. This is one of the, I think, bigger risks at the moment. AI is unaware of the hidden dependencies, hidden rules, deep domain nuances, right? Like I gave an example about the white coding app. Well, you forgot to say that the app is for the children, right? It still has all the features, but well, you maybe would have made different decisions along the way if this was part of the context, right? And people, we have a lot of knowledge like this. And the last one, that's kind of trying to condense all of them. These types of errors are kind of new types of errors that we are not used to, both in coding and not. if things don't work, like the app will crash, or the screen will won't open, or the button will not work. Well, with AI, it's going to give you an answer, just a wrong one, because naturally they are very false confident. They are trained to answer your questions rather than say that they don't know the answer, right? All of the frontier models are really working on this problem a lot, and on being able to tell no or this is nonsense, right? A few weeks ago there was this, what was it called, like the bullshit benchmark made out, where you have like complete nonsense generated question with like random nouns and random verbs, and not all of the models push back and say, okay, well, sorry, this is like a really gibberish thing, right? So that's an extreme example, but in normal example, well, they're still kind of yes mans a little bit, so they want to say yes, they want to say how things work. I have a very concrete example about this. So I asked like how a specific feature was built in a new project that I was onboarded, and someone asked the AI tool to kind of respond to this, and I'm like, okay, well, they have this like semantic search put up in place, so like it's an AI-related feature. Right, and then I kind of start digging through the code, and I don't see it, and don't see it. Well, and then I see there are some comments about, okay, and this is our cool semantic search, and then it uses some 10 years old keyword searching methods. Well, AI answered because it read the comments of the intent of the code rather than the code itself, right? And I was like, okay, well, sorry, we need to rework it. It's going to take like a week or two extra, right? So don't always trust them, but verify is probably what I would say. And don't still keep in mind that you are putting your signature on whatever is being created by AI. It's a tool like everything else. This is a picture from all of the documents that I used in to creating this presentation. I asked the Notebook LM, amazing tool. If you haven't tried it, try it. To just create. Just put it in the presentation because it's pretty. That's it from my side. Questions, if we have time.
Just a quick comment.
So, how many, please raise all hands, so, because we, 3, okay, let's go, 3 questions.
Okay, 3 questions. Okay. Cool, raise your hands, guys.
Yeah, did you make a skills for steps of software development lifecycle? I mean, skills for analysis, skills for. Did you make it for your project or?
So I'm in the mostly in the implementation phase, right? As a developer, I stretch out a bit more than that typically. So for like the planning and architecture and things, yes, I have some things. The planning modes into the like Cloud Code or GitHub Copilot and VS Code that I use, things like are actually pretty great. They've been in the last half a year they've become great, would be the correct way to phrase that, to do some like technical architecture planning level. So you don't maybe need a prompt for that. It's pretty good with the planning mode straight ahead. For the other stages, no. Well, I have for that I mentioned, like the coding part, like the PR reviews, some description, things like that. I don't touch too much on like the business analysis point of view. When I do some of that work, I don't have prompts, but I use like some chatty textual program, like we have Claude and ChatGPT, for example, but no prompt templates or anything like that.
So quick second question. Did you trust this low model? I saw a haiku in for analysis.
So that's a good observation. So preparing for the demo, I took this big database or big solution. I gave it to like a relatively small, or not to say stupid, but like a smaller model. Just because I know that I don't know and that you are gonna not make sense of it, so it's just for the demo effect.
Okay.
Yeah. It's great for small, iterative, independent tasks, not on the bigger tasks. Okay.
So I'm interested in documenting existing code, like in the example where you showed that the model analyzes the front-end code and gives you explanation in business language. Can you speak on how and in what ways you make it use correct business terminology? Because the code is of course written in technical all kinds of naming conventions?
There is no like one answer for me to this, right?
In your experience?
In my experience, if I ask it more from, okay, describe it from like a business analysis, or I usually say from the user's point of view. So it's going to reuse more of the terms that are like the labels of the UI and things like that. Also, depending on your like quality of the code, these not always need to be that much different. If you're using these kind of, at the end of the day, kind of coder tools like the IDEs that are meant for the coding, but for these tasks, they are going to give you like a more on the technical side of the thing. So you're correct in that you probably need to prompt it to do it in like a user's way or business analysis way. I typically say to describe me the logic, no code. Right? And then it's not going to meet these markdown links to the function.
And what about the information for the model, where it gets it? From like comments from database tables, you mentioned labels from interface, some documentation.
Yeah, so what I've done in cases like that, where sometimes you have like a legacy databases with the column names with some 4 letters that mean whatever they mean, right? Well, you probably have some descriptions for that, or if your developers have been thoughtful enough, then maybe you can have like a described field for the column names, right? So you will feed that in as well. And then it will translate you nicely to the human understandable language. So something like that. Also, if it's part of the, especially in the legacy code bases, this is often the case. The comments are sometimes very verbose, and it will actually help for this a lot.
What is your experience with natural language translation in the SQL? And basically, by the way, which model you are using, if it's not a secret?
I'm preferring cloud models. I'm used to them. I don't necessarily think that like they're marginally maybe better. Like every iteration is like the one or the other one. It's whatever. I'm just used to the output of them. They're a bit more STEM oriented, I think. But it's a preference thing at the end of the day. I think all of the harnesses and all of the LLM providers are very, very close together. And sorry, what was the first part of the question?
How far you are satisfied with the quality of the SQL code generated?
I think it's pretty good in the sense that I've also like fed in like the execution plans of the SQL, like when you're not executing the SQL query, but you can like generate a database plan which has like these more technical things that it's doing in the background. And for example, if your task is to optimize a complex query, that's like using tables and joins, you can say, okay, like this is the database technology, this is the SQL, this is the execution plan. Then you can actually do like a really high-level debug up to a level where you're doing like the plan hints in line for the SQL things like. So it's actually pretty great for that in my experience. I haven't done like any crazy stuff, like just a few million tables usually though. Okay, I'm gonna be around, so follow-up questions in the kitchen, I guess.